Batman over the years has had a ton of different animated movies that have come out, and while some of them definitely get the praise that they deserve, something like Batman Under the Red Hood or The Dark Knight Returns Part 1 and 2, they often get praised as some of the best Batman content we've ever gotten. However, there are definitely movies that do not get the amount of appreciation and love that they deserve, and one movie in particular that I almost never hear anyone talk about is actually a movie that pits Batman up against the Lord of the Vampires, Count Dracula. And that's why today we're talking the Batman vs. Dracula is absurdly underrated. But before we get into anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Alright, getting into the Batman vs. Dracula. This movie is so absurdly good. I can't believe this was actually the only movie that tied into the 04 The Batman series, considering the fact that Batman the Animated Series technically got 3 movies connected to that universe. Arguably 4 if you want to count Batman and Harley Quinn. However, that movie is an atrocity, so me and a lot of other fans like to pretend that movie never happened. However, even that being said, that means that universe got 4 films attached to that universe. So it is really weird that the series right after Batman the Animated Series and The New Adventures of Batman did not get more than 1 film adaptation. So you would think that must mean the film was really bad. It wasn't well received by fans. However, that's not the case at all. In fact, it is such a good movie. It is probably one of my favorite Batman animated movies we've ever gotten. It is so intriguing, and not to mention the fact that this film juggles multiple villains. Not only does it juggle multiple villains, it has 2 of arguably Batman's most iconic villains in the Joker and the Penguin, who are main parts of this story, and yet they somehow do not take away from the main big bad villain of the film, that being Count Dracula. Instead, they help to enhance his character. They help to showcase just how much of a threat this person is. And that's why getting into the things with this film that I really liked, right away you are immersed in this world of Gotham, and I absolutely love that. You get some ominous music that plays throughout the movie, and I feel like that really enhances the overall theme of the movie, and it just showcases how much fear is being shown throughout Gotham. One of the things in particular that I really like about this film is that they seem to age everything up. And by that, I mean in Batman the Animated Series, every now and then they would show a little bit of blood, or they would go down a dark route, show a little bit of dark themes. However, when it came to the 04 The Batman series, they realistically didn't do any of that. It was definitely made for a younger audience. So that's why when you have a film about Count Dracula, it could be pretty difficult. However, they decided they were just going to go all out, and in the very first interaction with the Joker, where he seemingly dies, you can tell how aged up this film is, especially in comparison to the 04 The Batman series, which this movie is connected to. You also get a decent amount of blood in this film, whether it's Penguin cutting himself, Batman getting cut, or different people getting drained of blood because the villains are literal vampires. And over the course of this film, we get to see Batman doing actual detective work. Some of the best Batman stories often follow him doing detective work. He is the world's greatest detective. So a lot of fans like to see that showcased in a movie. And as he tries to solve this mystery, he has to come to terms with the fact that vampires might actually be real. And even Alfred thinks this is incredibly absurd. But Batman needs to rationalize what he saw. And he said, there's no way what I saw could be human. The way they moved, the way they jumped, the way I would hit them and they didn't do anything. This just adds to the overall mystique of the movie and the mystery surrounding Count Dracula and what's going on in Gotham. So all in all, you're set up for a very enjoyable, very interesting, intriguing story. One of the other moments that I really liked actually happened a little bit earlier in the film, and it is after Batman seemingly lets the Joker fall to his demise, and we see Batman mourning the Joker. We see him having a heart-to-heart with Alfred. And if any of you have followed me on this channel for any time at all, you will know that I am a sucker for any type of emotional moment between Alfred and Bruce. One of the most important aspects of the character of Batman is establishing that relationship between Bruce and Alfred. It is probably, if not the most important dynamic for the character of Batman to have if you want to have a successful film. And this movie definitely executed that perfectly. And seeing Alfred just simply be there for Bruce in this time when he is extremely down, when he knows he couldn't save Joker in the end, just immerses us even further in this universe. We fully believe that these two people, Bruce and Alfred, care so deeply for each other. And we are also shown a side of Batman that we don't often get to see. His very empathetic and emotional side. The part of him that feels a great deal of sympathy. He needs to save everyone, even if they they're a villain, Batman believes that he can, at the end of the day, save them. If there is a chance to save someone, he is going to do it. And the way this film highlights that multiple times is probably one of my other favorite things about the film overall. However, this film doesn't just have emotional weight, it also has some pretty insane action. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, we get to see Batman go up against multiple vampires in this film, and the fights are pretty damn awesome. And that makes sense considering this is a version of Batman who essentially is a super soldier. There are moments in the animated show and also in this movie that he does things that no human could literally do, and I absolutely love it. It makes Batman feel like a mythological creature, and that's something that Dracula actually says to Batman. But that actually brings me to probably my favorite moment of this entire film, and that is actually the first interaction between Batman and Dracula. They meet on a rooftop after multiple SWAT team members get taken down by Dracula. The way he is introduced is so absolutely perfect. He is so ominous, and his presence can be felt right away. And he comments on the fact that Batman must have been inspired by him. And Batman retorts right away and says, "No, don't flatter yourself. This has nothing to do with you." And at this point, they do start to fight. And I like that Batman, although he's never encountered Dracula before, he seems to be ready. And by that, I mean he at least had some type of plan to attempt to deal with the Lord of the Vampires. And it's at that point we see the battle begin. And Batman at the beginning tries to throw batarangs that are coated in garlic. And another moment that I like about this fight is that Dracula is able to dodge these batarangs. However, as he is doing that, he smells them and notices that they are dripping in garlic. So he takes note that Batman is a very formidable adversary, and he acknowledges that Batman is pretty clever. However, unfortunately for Batman, his cleverness is not enough to get the upper hand in this fight, and we see that Dracula beats the absolute shit out of Batman to the point where he is going to either kill him or turn him into a vampire. However, luckily for Batman, the sun starts to rise just as Dracula is about to start feeding upon Batman. So Dracula has to flee, and it's at this point he issues a threat to Batman, and he says that the next time they meet, he will feed upon his corpse and leave nothing left. And that is just so ominous and just makes us all as viewers extremely worried for the next time Batman goes up against Dracula, because how on earth could he possibly face this extremely formidable foe? Then we go a little bit later on in the film, and we eventually see the Joker has survived once again. That is the Joker's MO. He always survives insanely crazy things, and it's at this point he actually tracks down Penguin, who has been working for Dracula. They were both in pursuit of this insane treasure. However, unfortunately for Penguin, instead of finding the treasure, he found Dracula's tomb, so he has been serving him this entire time. However, Dracula noted that he needed an actual human servant to watch over him during the day, so that, unfortunately for Penguin, ended up being Penguin. And in this moment, we get a fight between the Joker and Penguin. Joker is able to defeat Penguin, so the Joker goes up to the tomb thinking it is a giant treasure chest, opens it up, and then notices that it is a corpse. However, all of the viewers know this is not a corpse. That is literally Count Dracula, who is only asleep. And it's at this point he wakes up, grabs the Joker, and pulls him in. And although we don't get to actually see the brutality, we get to hear it. And as a viewer, it was pretty jarring knowing that the Joker was essentially getting mauled and mutilated by Count Dracula, especially when you consider the fact that this is from the '04 The Batman series, something that never leaned into those darker tones. So after this, we actually get to see a vampire Joker, something I never thought I wanted to see. However, it was incredibly intriguing to watch, to see him as a full-fledged vampire. And also, I found it really interesting that he wasn't necessarily a servant of Dracula. He was more so someone who was able to do what he wanted. However, at one point, he does say that he was merely Dracula's vessel. But even that being said, it doesn't seem like he is as controlled as the other vampires are by Dracula. And I don't know if that was necessarily by design, but either way, I actually really like it. I like the fact that Joker was seemingly able to go out on his own, unlike the other vampires, and that he wasn't under such strict control by Dracula. That let us get even better moments between Vampire Joker and Batman. And when talking about aging up a little bit, we get a fight in a literal blood bank, and at the end of the fight, the Joker literally gets covered in blood from the blood bank. Now, you could say, well, they found a loophole because it wasn't blood that was actually coming out of him. However, it was still him being covered in blood. And considering the fact that the '04 series never showed any blood at all, this was pretty ambitious, and I'm actually really glad they did it. It helped solidify that this film is definitely way more adult than the series that it came from. Another moment that I like actually happens after Batman is able to defeat the Joker. He has him locked up in a cell in the Batcave, and it's at this point we see Batman trying to find a cure for the Joker. And this is something that, unlike in some other stories, Batman doesn't find an easy fix. It is a ton of trial and error, and that's actually something this film does extremely well, showcasing how absolutely dedicated Batman is to being Batman. He will surrender almost every other aspect of his life in order to accomplish the mission that Batman has. And in this film, we see that he casts aside so many aspects of his personal life. He has a love interest in this film, Vicky Vale, and he routinely blows her off. He doesn't answer her calls. Also, he can deal with this threat of Count Dracula. And over time, we do see that he is able to come up with a cure to inoculate everyone who was infected with vampirism. And that's another thing I really like, is that this film actually treats being turned into a vampire as an actual disease that can have a scientific catalyst. So, in theory, there should be a theoretical cure. And seeing Batman just have his full science brain on, in addition to his detective hat, was just something that was really intriguing, and as a Batman fan, it was something I really enjoyed watching. And then when we go to the final battle, we see Batman taking on an entire squad of vampires. However, he is armed with the cure. So it's at this point we get a really awesome fight of Batman just dodging multiple vampires over and over again. And as he is doing this, he is just injecting all of them with the cure all at once, taking all of them down. And it's at this point we get our final battle between Batman and Dracula. And although at the beginning Batman thinks he found a way to cure Dracula, he very quickly realizes that Dracula is not like all of the others. Dracula is a supernatural occurrence. He is not something that can just simply be cured. So it's at this point Batman needs to change his plan on the fly. So he decides to lead Dracula back to the Batcave. However, as this is happening, Dracula is actively chasing him, and Dracula catches up to him multiple times. So we see Batman take a ton of damage. So much damage that when Batman gets into the Batcave, it's actually Dracula holding up Batman unconscious. And as Dracula revels in the fact that Batman essentially led Dracula back to the Batcave just to ensure that it was his own tomb, we see a moment where Alfred once again shows why he is one of the best characters in almost every single Batman project, and that is when Alfred decides to try to take on Dracula. He fires one of the cures at Dracula, and unfortunately, this was a futile effort, so Dracula simply goes over and knocks out Alfred. However, it was still a valiant effort by Alfred, showcasing that he will never let anyone try to hurt Bruce without him at least standing in the way. And it's at this point we see Batman ascend up in the Batcave, and Dracula simply thinks that Batman is running away. This is showcasing and highlighting how insanely arrogant Dracula truly is, and this leads to his ultimate demise, because as he is flying up, praising himself, talking about how Batman is essentially nothing compared to him, we see that Batman is standing right there with a particular device behind him, and once Dracula realizes what this device is, Batman turns it on, and it is something that emits a beam that is almost as powerful as the sun. It is essentially a giant sun gun, and it's at this point that Dracula starts to become insanely weakened, and as this is happening, we see a silhouette of Batman, and Dracula realizes that Batman is Bruce Wayne, and we get the awesome line where Batman says, "No, I'm the Batman," and he flies up only to punch the remainder of Dracula as he is burning and disintegrating, and that is it. Batman is able to defeat Dracula, and since he was actually turned to ash, there is essentially no way to bring him back unless you use a sacrifice in a ritual with someone else's soul. And considering the fact that all of the ashes from Dracula are now in the Batcave, that would be incredibly hard to do, so this actually solves the problem of Count Dracula forever. And although I am someone who appalls the thought of Batman killing, when it comes to an undead Lord of the Vampires in Count Dracula, it is probably the only instance that I am 100% okay with Batman breaking his no-kill rule, because to me, it doesn't really count. So all in all, I really enjoy this movie. In my personal opinion, I think this movie is at least a 9 out of 10. I find it extremely enjoyable. I feel like some of the only downsides from this movie, number one, the love interest. They seemingly always have to have Batman paired up with some romantic love interest, and Vicky Vale just felt very shallow to me. We didn't get deep into her character. However, in my opinion, I also don't think we needed to get that deep into her character. She was just kind of there, so I won't necessarily say this was an extremely bad thing, but it was just part of the plot that I wasn't that invested in compared to everything else we got in the film. And my only other thing is a little bit of a nitpick, and that is when we see Penguin able to find Dracula's tomb. The only reason he was able to find it it was because he was told about a treasure by another inmate in Arkham, and that's what actually made Penguin escape Arkham in the first place. So after he escapes, he finds the cemetery, and the only thing that the other inmate told Penguin was that the treasure was in a crypt with a cross. And at this point where we see Penguin get to the cemetery, we see dozens of crypts with crosses on them. And Penguin just so happens to enter the only crypt that contained Dracula. That just for me felt incredibly convenient. And at the end of the film, Penguin just so happens to find the crypt that he was initially looking for in the beginning with all of the treasure. However, I will say I normally have a rule with animated films where if more than 2 to 3 things end up being convenient, I will have an issue with them. However, considering the fact that this realistically only includes one instance of something being convenient, it's not something that I have a huge issue with. And considering the fact that Penguin finding the treasure at the end could be seen as convenient, doesn't really do anything to the overall plot. That's why I don't necessarily have an issue with that either. So all in all, this movie might have a couple of small flaws. Overall, it is an incredibly enjoyable and very well-paced story. But I'm interested to hear from all of you. What do you think of Batman vs. Dracula? Do you have an issue with him killing Dracula, or are you okay with it just like me? And what are some other films that you would deem incredibly underrated, whether they be animated DC films or even Marvel animated films? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And I'll see all of you in the next video. Goodbye.